Glenn Beck recently came out on his own show and pretty much admitted that he was crazy. I thought I'd been saying that for a while. Now, yes, I'm supposed to feel a little bad because he says he's got illness issues. And being the progressive that I am, I do feel a little bad. First, you're going to watch him cry, and then I'm going to give you further context.
For personal reasons, and business reasons, and you name it, I have not wanted to open up to you until tonight. But the real reason we have made these changes, the real reason that you are seeing changes in me is my health. I was told by doctors just this last spring when we moved off this stage that I could no longer work as the way I had been working because it was literally killing me. It has baffled some of the best doctors in the world. It has frightened me and my family as we didn't know what was happening. About 18 months ago, I checked into a hospital in New York City for some extensive testing. I had some of the best doctors in the world look at me, from IQ testing, you know, they did crazy tests, testing for seizures, concussions, EEGs, you name it. I was given a test that's given to people with traumatic brain injury, TBI. I knew I was functioning at about the bottom 10%. I knew when I couldn't figure out simple math problems or remember a series of words, I was in real trouble. I was told at the time that I would have somewhere between 5 and 10 years before I would no longer be able to function. I would be like that old man, except I would be 55.
Okay, some heavy stuff, also some questionable stuff in there. We'll get to that idea of being tested by the best doctors in the world. Not necessarily the case. He says additionally that he would feel tremendous pain throughout his body, have what appear to be something along the lines of seizures, and then he would feel things like shards of glass going into his feet. He would literally have his wife check his feet to make sure that he hadn't stepped in glass. He would curl up in fetal position. Now, of course, for the people who followed him religiously throughout, it can't be too heartening to know that you were following a guy who tested in the bottom 10% of mental faculties, by his own admission, a guy who had to be tested for his IQ, a guy who thinks he might be crazy. In fact, he went on to say that the mysterious ailment came on gradually over the course of the last few years, causing him to lose his memory and to suffer seizures, intense pain in his hands and feet, and fits of vocal paralysis. He had long bouts of insomnia, mental fogginess, I think I noticed that, and a spate of emotional outbursts that he said quite honestly, and this is a quote from Beck, has made me look crazy. Well, that part is true. Now, why is this? And is he better now? Now, he says he is. He says, now after a range of treatments by Carrick, his doctor that I'm going to tell you about in a second, including being strapped into and spun around in a giant gyroscope and an intense regimen of spiritual work and fervent prayer, Beck claims to have, quote, a clean bill of health. Let me be on the record here. Not buying it. Spun around on a gyroscope. Okay. He says, don't worry, quote, my brain is back online in a big way. I'm sure that's something to celebrate in the first place, right? And I'll tell you about why he might be doing this at the end, so his motivations for saying all this. So what did he think it was after all this? He calls it, quote, adrenal fatigue, okay? Now, is it? Well, last night on a program we do, a podcast we do with Ben Mankiewicz and myself, Ben, in the middle of this story, not having known the further details, said, I'm calling BS. I don't believe his doctor. I think this whole thing's quackery. And this whole idea of I prayed really hard and got better is nonsense. And it turns out he might be right. His doctor is described as a maverick chiropractic neurologist, Dr. Ted Carrick. So now Raw's story looked more into it. They actually went and talked to a Yale professor about this, Dr. Stephen Novella, and here's what he had to say. Chiropractic neurology does not appear to be based on any body of research or any accumulated scientific knowledge. I'm not aware of any research that establishes their core claims. He's a neurologist from Yale. This whole thing's made up. Look, what I said about Glenn Beck a long time ago was, He reminded me of the movie Beautiful Mind. You know, when Russell Crowe loses it and he starts writing on a chalkboard and he's got all the different conspiracy theories and he puts up the papers, the newspapers and the clippings and he keeps writing and writing and he thinks it makes sense, but it doesn't make any sense because he's lost his mind. So now the guy who lost his mind by his own admission is turning around and telling us, no, I'm totally okay because a doctor in a field that doesn't exist spun me round and round. And then I really prayed hard. Oh boy. More from Dr. Stephen Novella, an actual doctor. Chiropractic neurology appears to me to be the very definition of pseudoscience. It has all the trappings of a legitimate profession with a complex set of beliefs and practices, but there is no underlying scientific basis for any of it. Now, Raw Story looked into it a little bit more, and they say that they spoke with a representative of Emory Healthcare in Atlanta who pointed out that Beck's symptoms do not actually match those typically associated with adrenaline fatigue, which is a syndrome that affects people exposed to high levels of stress over long periods of time. We know what is questionable here, right? The prognosis, the doctor, the treatment, all of this is on very thin ice. Now, Raw Story gets in a little bit of conjecture as to what he might actually have, and you do with this as you will. They say many of Beck's symptoms, however, are common to patients suffering from panic disorder. Most people are aware of common symptoms of panic: increased heart rate, shortness of breath, a sense of impending doom, that sounds pretty true, and an irrational and escalating sense of alarm. Buy gold! The world's gonna collapse! Oh, Mom is out to get you! Look, I'm nowhere near a doctor. I have no idea if they're right about that. Let me finish up their theory here. They say, however, in extreme cases, the anxiety of a panic attack can be so intense that it develops into what are known as psychogenetic non-epileptic seizures. So they've matched up some of what's happened to Glenn Beck by his own description to what he might have. I don't know about that, but that's not important. What I do know is whatever issue he had, he didn't solve it by getting twisted like a gyro and fervent prayer. I know that, and I know that this pseudoscience crap that he's using now isn't going to work, and so he's got some serious issues. Now, this isn't just ha-ha, and as a progressive, I genuinely feel bad for him, even though I shouldn't, because he's caused so much damage in the world, right? But you have to understand who you're following if you're a Glenn Beck follower, okay? And because it matters. I mean, it matters less now, but when he was on Fox, the administration was listening to Glenn Beck. They literally sent to Shirley Sherrod, you're going to be on Glenn Beck's program in a matter of hours. You've got to resign. So basically, they forced her into resigning before the mighty Glenn Beck talked about her and embarrassed the administration. If you don't remember that story, Shirley Sherrod was completely innocent. She was a small part of the administration. Breitbart had found edited video of a part of her speech that was taken totally out of context. They painted her as a racist against white people. It was later proven that was not the case at all, It was made up. But the Obama administration panicked so much that Glenn Beck would talk about it that they basically threw her out, okay? Now, I give you that as one example, but there were dozens of examples of the Obama White House scared to death of a guy who now admits that at the time, he was completely crazy. That's so embarrassing. This guy had a real effect on our country, and to some degree still does. Is he cured? You make your own decision on that, right? But we know what he was by his own admission, and we know how much he was listened to. What does that tell you about us as a country, that this guy was influential? Now, finally, why is he doing this? Look, man, if there's one thing I know the field of digital online video. In terms of news, we're #1 at it, and we've been doing this since the end of 2005, almost 10 years now, right? We know what we're doing, we know the costs, we know the revenue, and I know that when Glenn Beck says that he has the revenue that he does, that it is not remotely true. So he's been going on a series of these little rants, one, to get more attention, right? Like, oh my God, how am I gonna get attention? If I say crazy conservative stuff, people don't pay attention to me. So I gotta go over the top. I gotta do things like say, okay, you're right, I was crazy. By the way, he also said, you're right, Iraq was a mistake, okay? And, oh, you know, I did some things on television that I shouldn't have done. He said all those things. Now, partly to get attention, but mainly, he's got to get another TV contract. If he doesn't, he's going to go bankrupt. So he's out there now saying, no, you were right. No, I was crazy back then. No, you're right, I know. But I spun around and around. I'm totally fine now. Totally fine. Please let me back on TV. I'm going to go bankrupt. Now, yes, that's conjecture. Again, it's up to you to decide whether that's true or not. But this is what we do on the Young Turks. We don't do Monday morning quarterback. We tell you ahead of time so you can test whether we're right or not. You can test our credibility. And I'm telling you right now that his business enterprise online is in a world of trouble, and they're in a panic to get back on television so they can make money. If I'm wrong, they'll last for another 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, and they'll have a wonderful career online. I look forward to it. If I'm right, at some point you'll soon hear, well, you know, they ran into some unexpected financial blah, 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 and they got to wrap up shop. Let's see.